Shadow Hack. Chapter 171, Elation from the Unexpected News. Li Yunmu subconsciously stopped his hand. Soul refining. That's right, my departed master once was a world master with a three-sun heavenly world. Therefore, I'm a little bit knowledgeable about heavenly worlds. I have very good understanding of soul refining heavenly world. My spirit was branded in my master's heavenly world, and after he died, I was liberated. Previously, I faked my death to kill you. I thought this heavenly world was born only recently, not expecting that you had already reached the lowest threshold of World Master. This being the case, your heavenly world is just perfect to receive soul refining. Li Yunmu, as long as you allow me to live, my soul will be refined to submit to your heavenly world, and I will offer everything I have to you. My only request is that you allow me to live. Lin Jian had completely discarded his pride, being strangely attached to living. Li Yunmu had no clue why it was so important to him. System, the soul refining he's talking about, what does it mean? How credible are his words? Li Yunmu quickly began to think while questioning System. According to the scanning of his brain waves and heartbeat, there is a 90% chance that his words are true. According to the limited knowledge possessed by the System, soul refining heavenly world should be an extremely high-level agreement method. The System replied after a long while. What's the use of soul refining? And be specific. Also, why are you so attached to living? I'd think a person who is given the title of Blade Overlord shouldn't be afraid of death. Li Yunmu questioned him. You've already entered the threshold of One Sun World Master, but surprisingly you still don't know about the soul refining? Apparently, the guess of some outsiders is right, the mysterious Li sect behind you really doesn't exist, Li Qinghong said with astonishment. Li Yunmu didn't reply to her. Whether the mysterious Li sect existed or not, he didn't need to fear these two knowing about it. As long as they were in his heavenly world, they could not tell his secrets to no one. Soul refining. If you use this technique, the mark of your heavenly world will be branded on my soul. From then on, my everything will be completely attached to your heavenly world. Whatever I do, including what I am thinking, won't be hidden from you. In fact, you will only need one thought to kill me. Only if there is a day when I, Lin Jian, will enter the battle sage realm and become flawless, only then my soul will be freed from the mark of your heavenly world. Otherwise, throughout my life, I will be a servant of your heavenly world. Lin Jian paused for a moment, and then continued in a slightly depressed tone of voice. As for why I want to live, that's because my enormous hatred hasn't been avenged yet. I'm not willing to die like this. Following Lin Jian's narration, Li Yunmu gradually came to know the bloody history of this person known by the title of Blade Overlord. He hadn't expected that it would be so full of hardships. I hadn't expected that you're from Blood-E-Wood, extraordinary, truly extraordinary. Then which Blood-E-Wood senior sage was your former master? Li Yunmu was startled by Blade Overlord Lin Jian's background. The legendary Blood-E-Wood wasn't a sect but something that surpassed it. In the 6 continents, apart from sects, there was still another type of power which stood at the pinnacle of the world. These type of powers were called Transcendent Powers. It meant they were existences which surpassed all the major organizations and clans. War God Temple of the Central Continent was one of these. Blood-E-Wood was another one of such transcendent powers. It wasn't affiliated to the Central Continent, though, but higher dimensional continent. That place was the main disaster area, which was hit directly by the dimensional shooting star before the Dark Ages. Even to this day, countless dimensional beasts roamed freely on that continent. Some of them were weak, while some of them were terrifyingly strong. Thus, higher dimensional continent had the lowest population among all the 6 continents. In this continent, ordinary people had no hope to survive, so each person who remained alive was extremely strong. These formidable people weren't ordinary nobodies, and most were fluxers. Usually, ones whose combat strength was extremely formidable as well. And Blood-E-Wood transcendent power came from this higher dimensional continent. According to hearsay, Blood-E-Wood was a sacred land within the higher dimensional continent which wasn't under the threat of dimensional beasts. As for whether there were any rules for the transcendent powers, there were 3 of them. The first was that the people of the transcendent powers could only exist in the world, but couldn't appear publicly. They couldn't participate or get involved in the power struggles happening in the 6 continents. Their members should only have one aim: attaining the peak of cultivation. The second rule to become a transcendent power was to have a battle sage. And he had to be alive, not be some perished ancestor. The third rule was that they must have 10 flux sage or higher level existences as well as 4 domain sage existences to manage all aspects. Furthermore, when Li Yunmu asked which senior sage was Lin Jian's master, it meant which domain sage. After all, a flux sage who hadn't congealed his domain didn't have the qualifications to be called a senior sage. Only domain sages and above could have the qualifications to be called such. My departed master was the previous generation's Dark Blade senior sage. He perished somewhere within the 7th dimension, Lin Jian answered calmly. Then you turned your back against Blood-E-Wood? Are you being chased by it? No, Blood-E-Wood doesn't allow its members to meddle in the secular world. I, Lin Jian, couldn't let go of my hatred, so I voluntarily separated myself from them. The reason I'm being hunted is because of my vengeance. Li Yunmu turned silent for a long while, then finally decided. Good, I will let you live because of your honesty. This Lin Jian was certainly a fierce person. Being the disciple of the previous generation's senior sage of Blood-E-Wood, if he hadn't drowned in his vengeance, he could now be one of the contestants to reach the pinnacle of the world. Compared to the proud sons and daughters of heavens Li Yunmu had previously heard about, Lin Jian was much more terrifying. If his soul refining technique could be implemented, then why should Li Yunmu miss the chance of obtaining such an extraordinary follower? By now, Li Yunmu had discovered that he was destined to face a lot of obstacles to advance in his path filled with lots of enemies. It would be very difficult for him to overcome all of them on his own. Moreover, if he wanted to congeal 12 sons, then he had to develop what could be classified as his own power. However, he possessed the system's deep knowledge as foundation, so it was extremely difficult for people with ordinary combat strength to catch his eyes. That's why, this Bladewood's Lin Jian was the perfect candidate to ally with. Apparently I also don't have much of a choice. I want to live, so I will choose to brand my soul with the imprint of your heavenly world. Li Qinghong, this clever woman, also understood Li Yunmu's personality and became aware that she wouldn't be able to have a lucky escape. I will not force you, you both can make your choice, Li Yunmu suddenly declared. If they didn't want to serve him, then even if both of them were the best choices, he would still prefer to go without. Nothing was often better than a shoddy version of what you needed. Then I will begin. Lin Jian was firm in his decision. He sat down, crossing his legs, and closed his 5 senses, then began to silently murmur the secret technique of soul refining heavenly world. Li Qinghong hesitated for a long while, but then also followed in his footsteps and also activated soul refining heavenly world secret technique. Shortly, Li Yunmu saw 2 small figures appearing above the heads of the 2 sitting fluxers. Once those small figures appeared, they were attracted by the pull of the sun and began to rise, soon entering the recently congealed first son of Li Yunmu's heavenly world. The small figures were actually the soul imprints of the 2 people, in other words, the origins of their souls. Li Yunmu immediately understood that the words of these 2 were true. Using soul refining heavenly world technique was equal to leaving their soul imprint in his heavenly world. They were now completely bound to him. Until the day they entered Battle Sage realm, their soul imprints wouldn't disappear. After comprehending everything, Li Yunmu was full of excitement. The acquisition of these 2 halted fluxers as subordinates was better than anything else he had gained from the hunt. Chapter 172, Sungod Bird. This is the most precious treasure of my Chao Tian sect, presently I am offering it to you. Li Qinghong and Lin Jian, both of them left their soul imprints within Li Yunmu's son. Before long had passed, Li Qinghong offered Chao Tian-sek's most precious treasure, holding it in both her hands. What surprised Li Yunmu most was that this item was surprisingly not any material item as he had imagined, but a drop of golden blood. Li Qinghong had unexpectedly moved her energy and removed it from her body. What is this? Is this the reason why you betrayed Chao Tian-sek? Li Yunmu did not accept it instantly but asked her about it with curiosity. The undying blood of the Sungod bird. 200 years ago, before Chao Tian-sek had been established, a sacred beast, the Sungod bird, was born at the peak of Chao Tian Mountain, turning it into its territory. The founder of Chao Tian-sek with a group of powerful people waged a great battle with this Sungod bird for 3 days and 4 nights and finally killed this sacred beast. But the group of powerful fluxers had also been reduced to a single survivor. The only person left alive was the founder of Chao Tian-sek. He refined this drop of Sungod bird's undying blood, and later, when he entered the sage realm, he founded the Chao Tian sect at the place of the battle. Li Qinghong calmly explained the secret origin of the undying blood, which was considered the most precious treasure of Chao Tian sect. At the time, the cultivation base of the founder of Chao Tian sect was only at Nirvana layer, and although he was only a step away from becoming a flux sage, how could this step be easy? Among the group of people who had surrounded and killed the Sungod bird at that time, the founder of Chao Tian sect was considered weak, and precisely because of this he managed to escape the sacred beast's attention. Thus, he became the most fortunate person in this group and came out alive, obtaining a great serendipity. In other words, this drop of Sungod bird's undying sage blood was actually the item which brought about the present Chao Tian sect. What a precious treasure! This was truly a precious treasure, the meaning of which couldn't be described simply. 1 drop of sage blood could lead to creation of a top-tier sect. When Li Yunmu heard the secret history, he sucked in a deep breath. This being the case, he was clear that given how mystical this drop of undying sage blood was, it could certainly be considered as a top-tier sage-level treasure. I really didn't expect that 200 years ago our Earth had surprisingly given birth to such a formidable sage existence. When Li Yunmu heard about the story of the drop of blood, his felt as if he could sense the great events happening at that time. During that age, opportunities and risks could be found on every corner, since it was probably the most critical time humans had ever faced. Sacred beasts weren't the same as dimensional beasts. They were beings that were born on Earth and thus received the opportunity to evolve because of the higher dimensional energy which had spread all over the Earth when the shooting star hit it. After evolving continuously, they finally entered the sage layer. They were powerful, extremely powerful existences, but presently, except for the wildernesses and mountain ranges, sacred beasts which had sage-level power were seen quite rarely. After all, as the weapons and technology of humans advanced and made its reappearance, sacred beasts which were native to Earth were surrounded and killed by powerful human experts. As for the reason behind my betrayal of Chao Tian sect, it was related to an internal disagreement. My body constitution had a rarely seen degree of compatibility with the Sungod bird's undying sage blood. Then, just because of this, I was allowed to enter Chao Tian sect. Li Qinghong continued to indifferently narrate the past events. The sect master accepted me as his personal disciple, and didn't even hesitate to bestow the sect's most precious treasure, the undying sage blood, on me. Swallowing this drop of blood nurtured my body's constitution and helped my cultivation. Initially, everything was going good, and I believed that I was extremely fortunate. But there came a time when I accidentally stumbled upon a secret. All the importance given to me wasn't because they sincerely wanted to nurture me, but because they viewed me as a cultivation furnace. They were just waiting for me to cultivate up to a certain level, then, under the name of dual cultivation, the great-great-grandson of the ancestor of Chao Tian sect would steal my body's constitution. You can imagine how I reacted. After learning about the true facts, I wasn't willing to become someone else's furnace and secretly schemed to leave Chao Tian sect. Li Yunmu gloomily sighed after hearing everything. Who could have thought that a legendary top-tier sect, a place which was considered as a sacred land, might act in such a way? The story of Li Qinghong was a typical example of a sect becoming monstrous. Given her situation, it wasn't a wonder that a talented genius like her had rebelled against the sect. You haven't started regretting it yet, right? Thinking about the fact that by keeping me alive you will provoke a powerful enemy like Chao Tian sect? Li Qinghong asked after noticing that Li Yunmu had been silent for a long time. Your soul is already bound to my heavenly world. In the future, don't use such tricks on me ever again. Li Yunmu's one sentence pierced through the other party's cheap tricks. Since this drop of undying blood has a rarely seen compatibility with your body's constitution, you should take it back and continue to use it to nurture your cultivation. In the end, Li Yunmu decided not to accept this precious treasure offered by the other party. You don't want it. This is sage blood which can bring you back from the dead. And it will also nurture your body, providing great help for your flesh to reach sage layer. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that as long as you nurture your constitution with this drop of undying sage blood, the difficult to pass through door of becoming a flux sage will be widely open for you. Li Qinghong didn't dare to believe, and even Lin Jian looked at Li Yunmu with incredulity. He was surprisingly refusing this drop of Sungod bird's undying sage blood. I don't want it. There is no need for me, Li Yunmu, to rely on this treasure to become a flux sage. Since you both are my subordinates, I don't want you to hold me back in the future. Li Yunmu doesn't need useless people, so properly increase your strength. Li Yunmu looked towards the two of them and added, although your soul imprints are under my control, I will not intervene in your matters or limit your freedom. I only want absolute loyalty, that'll be sufficient for me. In fact, if someday you both become flux sages, I will take the initiative to free you myself, but presently I hope you will sincerely serve me. What, you really aren't joking about this, right? After Lin Jian had handed over his soul imprint, the arrogance of being the Blade Overlord was no longer present in his mien. He was now under the control of another person, so how could he show any arrogance? Yet now he was tossed a ray of hope, and his eyes began to shine brightly. The chances of becoming a battle sage were very small. It was more or less simply hopeless. But if Li Yunmu was only speaking about him becoming a flux sage, this was not an impossible task, and so Lin Jian became hopeful. Given his innate talent and hard-working nature, becoming a flux sage was highly possible. That's right, since my cultivation is extremely low, I cannot do everything alone, so I need assistance from the two of you. But by the time you become flux sages, I will already be standing above the clouds. At that time, having you by my side will make no difference. Li Yunmu laughed lightly. His words were filled with enormous self-confidence. But he wasn't bragging. As someone who was the master of the system, he only lacked the time to mature and nothing more. And what concerned entering the flux sage layer, there was no need for him to rely on undying sage blood. If he cultivated his devil dragon bone refining secrets to the peak, his flesh would enter the sage layer anyway. The threshold of sage layer wasn't actually any threshold for him. However, other people didn't have the qualifications to know about these matters. Alright, after today, Lin Jian will become a steadfast follower of yours. If I cannot become a flux sage one day, then I will serve you my entire life. Until the day I become a flux sage, I won't mention my vengeance. Lin Jian could sense the confidence behind Li Yunmu's words. At this instant he had surprisingly believed the youth before his eyes and firmly decided to lower his head. All right, since you didn't cut off my chance of becoming a flux sage by taking the sage blood, Li Qinghong will sincerely serve you until the day I become a flux sage, Li Qinghong said, unable to make sense of the youth before her. That settles it. I will now deliver the first matter you need to take care of. Secretly enter Hangzhou King City with my parents and sister and proceed toward my Azure Dragon Heavenly General Mansion. You must escort them into the Heavenly Cloud Steel Castle. Chapter 173, Clearing a Full Account. Heavenly Master, you want us to bring your family to the fifth dimension mainly to ensure their safety, right? After hearing the first matter which Li Yunmu had asked them to carry out, Lin Ji unsurprisingly became lost in thought. Li Yunmu nodded in confirmation. That's right, although my family is already living within the Heavenly General Mansion in the Hangzhou King City, but I just slaughtered many fluxers from every power in the central continent. I don't think that a mere title of Heavenly Major General will be enough to intimidate them. I must ensure that there is no threat to my family's safety. Li Qinghong and Lin Jian were two halted fluxers who were presently considered dead. This secret mission was perfect for them, since they could complete it without anyone taking wind of it. Moreover, the two of them stood at the peak of the fifth dimension in terms of strength. So once his family entered the fifth dimension, Li Yunmu won't have to worry about them with these two protected them. The cultivation of these two had already reached the limits of the fifth dimension, and so they were now suppressing their cultivation and instead working to increase their mental state rather than their strength. So by entrusting these two to protect his family, Li Yunmu didn't have to worry about hindering their cultivation. As for the Cloud City Steel Castle, although there had always been the law that fluxers couldn't bring ordinary people with them, Li Yunmu didn't care about it much. What are laws? They're just some regulations made by humans, so they can also be broken by humans. Lin Yuero was temporarily substituting as the city lord of the heavenly Cloud City, so as long as she said one word, the people ruling Cloud City Steel Castle would naturally follow it obediently. However, the next instant Li Qinghong's words caused great upheaval in his plans. Heavenly Master, your way of doing things is mistaken. Even if with mine and Lin Jian's strength, we can ensure their safety, but there will certainly come a day when some accident happens. Furthermore, which place in this whole world is more safe than the great courtyard of War God Temple? I know that War God Temple has already sent you an invitation to participate in their trial by fire, so once Heavenly Master passes it, your family will be able to enter the great courtyard. Then who will dare to offend a monster like War God Temple? Even battle sages wouldn't dare, she explained, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She could now clearly see that the mysterious Li sect behind Li Yunmu didn't exist, otherwise he wouldn't be so clueless about all this secret knowledge which was known to every fluxer. Oh? If I enter War God Temple, my family will also obtain the qualifications to reside in its great courtyard. Li Yunmu was startled. Naturally, otherwise how could War God Temple ensure that their members only focus on cultivation without being affected by the worldly matters? Lin Jian also smiled and proceeded to explain, basically, as long as a fluxer becomes a member of War God Temple will voluntarily assist them in settling the trifling worldly matters, so that they don't need to worry about them anymore. The great courtyard of War God Temple is also in the heavenly world of War God Temple's founder. Apart from members of the temple and their families, no one else is allowed to enter it. Li Qinghong's words are right, there isn't any place in this whole world which is more secure than War God Temple, which is like Bloody Wood which I used to serve previously. This time Li Yunmu became completely silent. He only now discovered that the letter of invitation to the trial by fire sent by War God Temple, which he hadn't attached any importance to previously, had this sort of huge benefit. War God Temple's invitation letter hadn't been delivered to me. Li Yunmu had a slight headache. He remembered that there was someone who claimed that he was a fluxer of Heavenly Cloud City when trying to approach him. That person had stated that his purpose was to deliver War God Temple's invitation letter to him. However, at that time, Li Yunmu's situation was extremely critical and he was being ambushed from all sides, so how could he easily believe some stranger? Furthermore, he also didn't view War God Temple's invitation with any importance at that time, thus he didn't stop and shot an arrow towards that messenger to make him withdraw. Doesn't matter, the things that War God Temple wants to deliver, regardless of anything, they will find a method to deliver them in your hands, Li Qinghong said with absolute certainty. Moreover, from the moment you were added to their list, as long as you don't fail the trial by fire, other powers won't dare to have any ideas about your family. That's why, presently, Heavenly Master, your family is relatively safe. As long as you don't fail the trial, no one will dare to bring the slightest harm to them. So overbearing. Li Yunmu understood that he had greatly underestimated those transcending powers. Transcending powers are naturally overbearing. They don't intervene in the worldly matters, but they are still greatly respected by the worldly powers. Lin Jian, who was a former member of Blood-E-Wood, had the most right to say this sentence. Then for the moment I don't need to worry about my family's safety. Are you sure? Fairly certain. Li Qinghong and Lin Jian nodded together. That's good then, this matter had caused a lot of headache for me. Since it is settled now, then I feel even more unrivaled. Li Yunmu began to laugh his head off. Since there wasn't any threat of external factors, then he could move unhindered within the fifth dimension, not to mention that he also had the two of the most powerful halted fluxers by his side. Let's go. Since we don't need to worry about it, then from now on, you don't need to hide yourselves. You should join me now and enter virtual dimension, we have an account to settle. Li Yunmu waved his hand. The black cloud over him had disappeared, so he wanted to go wild. The next moment, leading his two followers, he entered virtual dimension. Their first target were the offices of the three largest betting companies. At this moment, Li Yunmu didn't need to conceal his whereabouts, and he also didn't need to hide his head and show his tail. Once the king crystal armor emitting the multicolored light which was rarely seen on Earth appeared on the main street of virtual dimension, it immediately attracted the attention of all the fluxers. My god, isn't this the king crystal armor? A fluxer adorning king crystal armor is extremely rare. Who is he? Surprisingly today I got to see such a thing, someone actually dared to use a king's dimensional crystal to congeal armor, so domineering. Am I going crazy? This is the halted fluxer Li Qinghong. Hadn't she perished at the setting sun mountain range? I was sure of it. That person beside her is Lin Jian, the person known as Blade Overlord within the fifth dimension. Give him a blade and he will suppress the whole world. He didn't die. Li Qinghong, Lin Jian, these two top-tier halted fluxers, they both have appeared together. At this moment, Li Yunmu's group of three people was really too dazzling. A person wearing king crystal armor and two adorning rainbow crystal armor had appeared together in the main street of the virtual dimension. This was a rarely seen sight. However, when the somewhat knowledgeable people discovered the true identity of Li Qinghong and Lin Jian, they were shocked as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Halted fluxers could move unhindered in the fifth dimension, but this didn't mean that they were unrivaled. Since they had suffered from the suppression of some great powers, they usually wouldn't reveal their tracks, not to mention walk on the main street of the virtual dimension with such swag. Furthermore, Li Qinghong and Lin Jian had appeared together. They hadn't perished but were instead following behind a youth at this moment, so who was this person? Who was this great character who could make these two tyrants of the fifth dimension into his willing followers? Soon, while great waves were surging within everyone's heart, the news of Li Qinghong and Blade Overlord Lin Jian following after a king crystal armor wearing youth spread through the virtual dimension, and then even through the whole outside world. Suddenly, some quick-witted people had guessed the name of that youth in their hearts, Li Yunmu. Surprisingly, he was able to turn Li Qinghong and Lin Jian into his followers. Chapter 174, Appraisal. Li Yunmu led his two followers to pay a visit to the three largest betting companies one by one. When they walked out of the last one, Li Yunmu had received his 30.9 billion. He was instantly wealthy. 30 billion dimensional coins. This was not a laughable amount. For an ordinary person, 30 billion dimensional coins was an amount they wouldn't be able to earn in 100 lives. If an ordinary person's monthly salary reached 300 dimensional coins, they wouldn't be considered somewhat rich but rather wealthy. But given the spendings of a world master of a heavenly world, 30 billion wouldn't last even a day. The three of them didn't continue strolling around the virtual dimension. After making a round, they concealed their crystal armor using a black cloth and went to the Good News Pavilion. When Li Yunmu entered its rear courtyard, a multitude of thoughts were running through the old shopkeeper's mind. Although he had heavily bet on Li Yunmu before the large search and capture operation and transferred 300 million to him in exchange for a favor, but this favor, if it was honored right away, naturally wouldn't be worth much. However, if it was repaid after a couple decades. When the old man saw Li Yunmu coming over with Lin Jian and Li Qinghong, he instantly became aware that his previous gamble had worked out. Although he hadn't expected this youth to be able to reverse the situation so quickly. The net cast by nearly 2,000 fluxers had been tyrannically broken, the youth having cut a bloody path out of it. And not only had he seized overwhelming victory, he had also gained two formidable people famous in the entire fifth dimension as his followers Li Qinghong and Lin Jian. Today, the old man was finding it quite difficult to control the excitement in his heart. Blade Overlord Lin Jian, this name needed no introduction. He was one of the disciples of 8 Broadswords Senior of Blad Ewood. His existence alone placed him on the highest clouds, making him one of the forerunners among the people who would become the most powerful in the world. If it hadn't been for his revenge which caused him to suppress his cultivation, he would have already entered temporal layer before reaching 20 years, and would have been looking to step into the nirvana layer. As for the beautiful and elegant young woman, Li Qinghong, her name was even more powerful than that of Lin Jian. Her frightful imperial spear had slain who knows how many powerful enemies within the fifth dimension. Even if a powerful sect like Chao Tian sect had been sending numerous elite disciples into the fifth dimension for the past 2 years, they still weren't able to capture her. Moreover, since the old man had some dealings in the underground market, he had even more understanding of that situation. Reportedly this Li Qinghong had stolen the undying sage blood which was the founding treasure of the Chao Tian sect. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this young girl, Li Qinghong, if she didn't face any mishaps in the future, she would certainly enter the sage layer. Moreover, she was an extremely formidable person who had a chance of becoming a flux sage before she became 30 years of age. However, these two formidable people who could dazzle anyone had become Li Yunmu's followers. When faced with this, not just the old man but the majority of fluxers who heard it expressed their astonishment and incredulity. What kind of courage and self-confidence did this Li Yunmu have that he even accepted these two people as his followers? No one had a clue about what had happened between these 3 people during the brief period of half a day. Unimaginable, unimaginable. No wonder so many people outside are calling you a freak of nature. This old man didn't believe earlier, but now I am convinced. The old man hurriedly greeted the 3 of them, gesturing for them to take a seat, showing proper etiquette for the whole group. Stop with the formalities, old ho. I believe you know why I came here today. Li Yunmu mentioned the main question of his presence here right away, while sipping his tea. I have already guessed, you don't need to say more. When the time to appraise the products comes, the capital and manpower of my good news pavilion will be at your disposal. Everyone is a relative of mine whom I trust, which will ensure that your matter will be handled at the fastest speed, the old shopkeeper said, beaming with smiles. That's good, I will first settle the account. Li Yunmu wasn't fond of owing money to people. 300 million dimensional coins were transferred to the account of Good News Pavilion in a moment. He then waved his hand and the rear courtyard was filled with a mountain of loot. There were exactly 777 items, not one more, not one less. The items started from weapons of all grades to every kind of life-saving treasure and healing medicine. In fact, there are even some items with strange uses. Although Old Ho was mentally prepared, but when Li Yunmu produced such a pile of loot, he was still greatly shocked. Were these the spoils of war he had seized after killing all those fluxers? Moreover, these spoils of war had been carried by fluxers on their bodies, not deposited in their storage batch, so their value to their owners had been quite significant. Old Ho instructed people to immediately start with the appraisal. 8 middle-aged men who were responsible for this task weren't fluxers but ordinary people. All of them were loyal servants of Old Ho's clan and had been raised under the control of his relatives, thus he didn't need to worry that they would divulge some secrets. The appraisal process was quite fast. One by one the spoils of war were quickly categorized into different groups. These are extremely rarely seen 5A grade poison bayonets. They're a relatively special type of weapon which is forged from 5 highly toxic ores. Even if a rainbow crystal fluxer is stabbed with one, he won't be able to survive unless he uses a spirit-grade healing medicine. Initial estimate is 280 million dimensional coins. However, the owner will certainly not want to sell them and would set them aside for his own use. If they're used together with a poison-type flux skill, then the results will be even more terrifying, one of the middle-aged appraisal masters said with astonishment. He hadn't expected that even this kind of extremely terrifying weapon wouldn't be able to interest this youth. Immediately the admiration in his heart grew even more, especially since only heaven knew how this person had resisted against that large-scale hunting operation. Appraisal masters were ordinary people, so they didn't understand. What terrifying 5 poison weapon, if it couldn't break the opponent's defense, then it was useless. They also didn't know what absolute defense meant. This is a C-grade body protecting jade treasure which can somewhat resist an all-out attack of a golden crystal fluxer. The price would be 130 million. Li Yunmu was surprised when he heard it. Even a C-grade body protecting jade treasure is so valuable. Life-saving treasures have always been more expensive compared to traditional weaponry. Since they can save one's life at a critical time, naturally they will be more valuable. This is an item made by using dimensional technology. It is called the Great Sun Golden Cover and can resist an all-out attack of a silver crystal fluxer. After it is recharged once, it can resist 5 attacks continuously, and it can be recharged over and over again. It is an extremely advanced dimensional technology product, so its value is also very high. In the black market it can be sold for around 300 million dimensional coins. Chapter 175, Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets. This is the 6th dimension's heaven fruit juice. It has only one use to paralyze a transcendent flux master, because of which it is one of its kind terrifying item, a treasure to aid in killing those of higher levels. But because there isn't much left, it can only be used 1 or 2 more times. Its value is around 1,100 million dimensional coins. This is an extremely rare medicine which can regenerate bone and flesh, refined by the medicine sect of the southern continent. If a fluxer used it, even a great wound could be healed. But if an ordinary person used it, it could even regrow a limb. When one of the appraisal masters said this, he was interrupted by Li Yunmu. You said it can regrow limbs for ordinary people. Yes, this is an A-grade bone and flesh medicine refined by a supreme sect. The body constitution of a fluxer undergoes evolution, so this medicine cannot help regrowing body parts for them, but if it is used by ordinary people together with the flesh of a compatible evolved beast, then such a result can be certainly achieved. This medicine's price approaches nearly 3 billion. The main reason for this extremely high price is that the master of the medicine sect who could refine this medicine passed away 2 years ago. Good, very good. The greatest worry hanging over Li Yunmu's head all this time could finally be laid down. This was the second time that Li Yunmu praised the appraisal master, which delighted the man greatly. Since such a thing happened, he knew that old Ho would certainly not treat him unfavorably. Li Yunmu had originally obtained a bottle of sacred life water, but after sustaining the attack from the forbidden weapon, he had to consume 3 drops. Presently, there were only 4 drops left, and Li Yunmu was afraid that this quantity wouldn't be sufficient to regrow his father's legs. After all, the main use of the sacred life water wasn't to regrow limbs, it was an extremely precious life-saving treasure. If it was used just for regrowing someone's legs, it would really be a great wastage. But now that Li Yunmu had the bone and flesh regenerating medicine, his heart, which had been anxious for a long time, finally calmed down a lot. He definitely hadn't expected that this batch of looted items would surprisingly contain so many pleasant surprises of different types. Soon, the 8 appraisal masters properly classified all the 777 items according to their grades. On top of each of them there was a small tag with detailed notes which made the item's usage clear at a glance. The number of A-grade spoils was 37, B-grade spoils had 168 treasures, and the number of C-grade spoils was the largest. As for D-grade spoils, there were none. After all, the cultivation of each of these items' owners had been at least silvery crystal layer. They were also more formidable than average fluxers, so it was no wonder that none of the important treasures they carried on themselves were D-grade. Apart from this, there were approximately 36 items which were classified as special type of spoils. It was very difficult to evaluate their real grade because if their user was good, then these treasure would show even better results compared to A-grade items. However, if their user was inferior, the results would naturally be terrible. Additionally, the true unexpected surprise was the 3 unknown treasures. The 8 highly experienced appraisal masters of the Good News Pavilions couldn't understand what these 3 items were used for. Li Yunmyu could only collect them back into his heavenly world once again. He had to spend 120 million just to get the large pile of spoils appraised, and this was when Old Ho was charging the lowest price possible. From this it could seem that these items collected from more than 200 higher cultivation fluxers were extremely astonishing, and were even more valuable compared to the enormous wealth earned by Li Yunmyu from the huge wager. There are still some good stuff left, which you should personally take a look at. Li Yunmyu waved his hand, and instantly, the 700-something treasures were collected back into his heavenly world. He didn't intend to sell his spoils of war because there were few wealthy buyers who could buy these things, so he decided to store them for the time being. Maybe he'll find a use for them in the future. Furthermore, because this was the virtual dimension world, these spoils of war were actually just a projection of the real product. So even if Li Yunmyu wanted to sell them, it was impossible for this transaction to take place in the virtual dimension. The items which could be sold and bought in the virtual dimension were only the dimensional items or life forms for now. This was this world's principle, because the virtual dimension could only be considered as half real and not a true world. As for a better explanation why it was so, Li Yunmyu didn't know it. In any case, after the dimensional shooting star had fallen on Earth, the land had undergone major transformations. The previously used observations and scientific knowledge could no longer explain the unfathomable deeds accomplished by the humans of the new era. Old Ho quickly dispersed the 8 appraisal masters. Only then did Li Yunmyu begin to take out some extra things, placing them on a tabletop. The old man had done several transactions with Li Yunmyu, so he was well acquainted with his nature. He would always save the most precious for the end. If the previous 700 spoils of war were considered as starters, then it was now time for the main course. Sure enough, the first item taken out by Li Yunmyu gave a huge fright to Old Ho. 5th dimensional treasure weapon. Take a look. Li Yunmyu naturally knew that this was a 5th dimensional treasure weapon, because these weapons emitted a multicolored light which was known by every fluxer. But as to how good such a weapon was, answering that question still required an experienced appraisal master. After all, among the 5th dimensional treasure weapons, there were both good and bad, weak and strong. The name 5th dimensional treasure weapon was used for all the weapons which appeared naturally within the 5th dimension and nothing more. The weapon which Li Yunmyu had taken out was the one he had obtained from the golden crystal fluxer named Zhang Tianhang, a pair of gauntlets. Since Li Yunmyu had decided to get it appraised, he naturally knew that this weapon was much more formidable compared to ordinary 5th dimensional treasure weapons. The reason for it was an obvious one: because of the 5th level arrow evasion's advanced judgment, he could still sense it. Old Ho took the gauntlets into his hands and carefully observed them for a while. Then, as if he was not daring to believe what he was seeing, suddenly, his entire body trembled and he raised his head to look at Yang Chen with an astonished expression. Li Yunmyu felt something was odd and hastily asked, "What? If my eyes aren't seeing wrong, then this isn't a 5th dimensional treasure weapon. If I didn't make a mistake in my evaluation, then they should be a temporal layer weapon." Allow me to look again. This time, the old man looked for half an hour. After it, he released a long breath. I'm 100% sure. This isn't even a temporal layer weapon but a nirvana layer weapon, just one step away from becoming a sage layer weapon. Are you certain you found it on the body of a golden crystal fluxer? The old man turned silent. There was still some bastard in this world who could bestow a famous nirvana layer treasure on a golden crystal youngster? This treasure weapon had great reputation. Even though it wasn't a sage layer weapon, its effects actually surpassed those of ordinary sage layer weapons. It was extremely famous, having a renowned name of Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets. Chapter 176, Pearls Cast Before a Pig. Certain. Weren't you doubtful before that it was temporal layer? Then why are you now so certain that this weapon has been upgraded to nirvana layer? Li Yunmu asked, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. This weapon has certainly been obtained from a golden crystal fluxer. He was called Zhang Tianhang, and should be descendant of a flux sage. Li Yunmu quickly narrated the details of him killing Zhang Tianhang. He remembered it well, since that person had left quite a lasting impression on him. He'd had many divine protection seals, an imprint left by a flux sage, and even treasure weapons. Zhang Tianhang. After hearing Li Yunmu's word, Old Ho as well as Lin Qinghong and Lin Jian, who were standing nearby, all cried out in surprise at the same time. N. After seeing the identical responses of the three people, Li Yunmu prepared himself for what was to come. He silently nodded to himself. No wonder, so it was this person, Old Ho said, smiling bitterly. Okay, what is the history of this sage descendant, tell me, Li Yunmu asked with interest. The events that had taken place could not be reversed, and so he now had many enemies. Perhaps collecting them had already become his habit. Li Qinghong, Lin Jian, and Gu Chengfang were all halted fluxers. All of them had suppressed their cultivation and remained alive even after major powers had tried to hunt them down for a long time. If they could accomplish this, then why couldn't Li Yunmu do the same? This Zhang Tianhang, there is actually nothing pertinent to say about him. If I was to describe him in one line, then he could only be said to be mud on top of a wall. However, he had a powerful background, for he was a second great-grandson of bestial sage. His only second great-grandson, the only person in this world who possessed his bloodline. You have enormous guts to have slaughtered Zhang Tianhang. This hatred is not one that can be resolved. The old man sighed while shaking his head. Ha, so what should I have done, just allowed his second great-grandson to kill me? What kind of logic is that? Li Yunmu said with a sneer. Say, what kind of god is this bestial sage? I've heard about many sage-level powerhouses, but all of them seem the same to me. However, according to Old Ho's words, it seems like this bestial sage is someone extraordinary among the sage layer experts. Li Yunmu asked, paying serious attention to it. Strategy requires one to look down on the enemy, but tactics require that one doesn't underestimate the enemy. Not to mention when that enemy is a flux sage. Bestial sage hasn't established any faction or clan, however, he is extremely protective by nature. Zhang Tianhang was his only direct descendant in the world. So he greatly valued him, and all experienced fluxer knew about it, and accepted this matter as such. Even we halted fluxers wouldn't go provoking him if there wasn't exceptional hatred between us. After all, a river can't offend an ocean, Lin Jian said solemnly. And what is the precise strength of this bestial sage? Li Yunmu asked while nodding. Extremely formidable. 60 years ago he had already become a domain sage, so right now his cultivation should be in the high layer. The sage layer is generally divided into three major realms: ordinary sage, domain sage, battle sage. People known as ordinary sages were those whose flesh had broken through to the sage layer, allowing them to become a flux sage powerhouse. They were the weakest type of flux sage. The next step was domain sage. They had formidable strength and were considered as the group of people standing at the peak of the strength pyramid of the 6 continents. However, Domain Sage, this major layer, was divided into 3 minor layers. From low to high, they were divided among Lower Flux Sage, High Flux Sage, and Senior Flux Sage. To Lower Flux Sage belonged those Domain Sages who had congealed a weak domain, whose quality was not that good. Their domains weren't concise and compact and had many flaws. As for High Flux Sages, they represented those Domain Sages who had congealed higher domains which had few flaws and were naturally many levels higher compared to those of Lower Flux Sages. As for Senior Flux Sages, this layer referred to those who had succeeded fully in congealing a domain without any weak spots. They were complete masters of their domains, and hence were known by that title. Thus, when Li Qinghong mentioned that Bestial Sage's cultivation had reached High Sage layer, for a moment, Li Yunmu felt a headache. Heavenly Cloud City's Fluxer Association's master was a Lower Flux Sage, but he had already created many problems for Li Yunmu. Then what shall be said about a High Flux Sage whose domain was more or less perfectly congealed? Li Yunmu's only relief was that this Bestial Sage hadn't founded any major power and was just a loner domain sage. That's still all right, we can fight back. Li Yunmu said with a smile, after finding that only good thing. The hatred between them couldn't be resolved. The enemy wanted to kill him, so not fighting back wasn't something he could do. If even when he possessed a great reserve like his system, he would continue to bow his head everywhere, then that wouldn't make much sense. Li Qinghong had only mentioned one of the facts about his strength. There is another reason why he is considered as someone who should be feared. He possesses secondary flux energy. Apart from his personal strength being formidable, he also formed a contract with 3 sage beasts who have extremely formidable innate bloodlines. That's why he was given the title of Bestial Sage, Lin Jian added. Li Yunmu's mood immediately turned ugly. F***CK, this Bestial Sage is also the heaven's destined child? Cheat, his existence is just a F***ing cheat. What you two said is right, this Bestial Sage is a comparatively unique existence. However, destiny is also impartial. He took upon himself the name of Bestial Sage, but it is his glory as it is his downfall. Because he divided his attention to become a secondary flux energy sage, there is very little hope for him to become a battle sage in near future. So in a broad sense, little brother, you can regard it as good news among all the bad news, old Ho consoled him. Li Yunmu felt quite comfortable. Although the other party had only said these words to console him, the news that Bestial Sage is unable to become a battle sage indeed allowed him to breathe a sigh of relief. As long as he wasn't facing an existence like a battle sage, he didn't feel truly terrified. Let's not talk about this Bestial Sage anymore. If he wants revenge, he will have to come to the 5th dimension for it. Old Ho, you were earlier saying something about this weapon. Yes, since it has been obtained from Zhang Tianhang, then I'm even more certain. This item is supremely suited for battle and its name had shaken the entire 6 continents. This name is renowned through all the worlds, and it is Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets. Their previous master was a Lower Flux Sage, but he hasn't shown himself in the past few decades. So these Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets had also disappeared for the past few decades. Even to this day there are many powerful people who are searching for their whereabouts. But this isn't important, the part that interests you is that these Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets are one of the 5 items of the legendary Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit. Although the pieces of this suit are only Nirvana layer weapons on their own, but if the whole set is gathered, they will complement each other to the extent it'll be the most powerful sacred suit. Some rumors glorify it even more, naming it as Azure Dragon Deity Suit. Old Ho lamented in a tone which bystanders wouldn't understand, one weapon of the legendary Azure Dragon Deity Suit, this old man hadn't expected to encounter one of these weapons in his lifetime. I must offer my sincere gratitude to you, little brother, you have picked up a treasure, a supreme treasure. Who could have expected that one of the weapons of the Azure Dragon deity suit would have fallen into the hands of the bestial sage? And what is even more important, this bestial sage surprisingly handed it to a golden crystal youngster who couldn't display even 1% of its true power. Li Qinghong quickly moved to put on these Azure Dragon Tyrant Gauntlets, and the next instant, her rainbow crystal flux energy erupted. Instantly, the Azure Dragon Tyrant Gauntlets transformed, finally revealing their true forms to everyone present. The legendary Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit, they truly belong to it. According to legends, if a battle sage collected all 5 pieces of the Azure Dragon deity suit, then he could even slaughter gods. Chapter 177, The Whereabouts of Azure Dragon Leg Guards. The legendary Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit, these are its true parts. According to legends, if a battle sage collected all 5 pieces of the Azure Dragon deity suit, then he could even slaughter deities. Li Qinghong then added, astonishing everyone, if Zhang Hengtian could display even 1% of their true power, then Master probably would have lost at that time. These Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets are the claws of Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit and can be described as its most lethal component. Li Yunmu now saw the true appearance of the Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets for the first time. At this moment, they weren't just 2 simple gauntlets but rather covered the whole arm until the elbow. They were deep black in color and were scaled like a dragon's skin. 5 dragon claw-shaped bones, which appeared to be like gold sometimes and diamond at other times, grew from Li Qinghong's fingertips. She moved her wrist once, and the new bones suddenly covered the top of her fingers, completely turning them into black dragon claws. When she moved her fist again, these bones withdrew back, revealing the Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets covering her fists. Clearly, Li Qinghong was quite familiar with this weapon. Unfortunately, I'm truly unable to use this Azure Dragon deity suit's true killing power. Master, it is indeed related to you by fate. Li Qinghong reluctantly took off the gauntlets and pushed them toward Li Yunmu. I'm related to them by fate? Why do you say that? Li Yunmu involuntarily asked. Because only those who use King Crystal Armor or have the strength of the Sage Layer can truly merge their crystal armor with these Azure Dragon Gauntlets. The crystal armor of others is simply not compatible with them. Old Ho bitterly laughed. Awesome! At this moment, Li Yunmu became even more sure that his decision to congeal King-grade crystal armor hadn't been the least bit wrong at that time. Either don't congeal your armor or congeal the best one. Due to Old Ho, Li Qinghong, and Lin Jian's explanations, Li Yunmu gradually gained a little bit of understanding toward the most formidable supreme battle suit in the world. Under the entire heaven, there were only 5 of such supreme suits. They were Azure Dragon Deity Suit, Barbarian Battle Deity Suit, Witch Deity Suit, Hegemonic Deity Suit, and Dual Star Deity Suit. It was rumored that these 5 supreme suits had come from 5 different deity secret regions and had been created using the blood essence and flesh of deities. And all of these suits consisted of 5 components. These components were helmet, breastplate, leg guards, gauntlets, as well as the final and most important component, which was the core of the suit, deity crystal. During the past 200 years, many formidable ancestors had gathered scattered parts of the supreme battle suits from the historic ruins in the 7th dimension. Almost every time all the components of a supreme battle suit were gathered, it resulted in a great carnage. According to the publicly known information, only War God Temple's War God had gathered the majority of the components of one of the supreme battle suits. He presently had 4 parts of the Barbarian Battle Deity Suit, the helmet, breastplate, leg guards, and gauntlets. He now only lacked the deity crystal, which was considered as the most core component. But even so, War God was praised as the most powerful person on earth, just because he had gathered the 4 components of the Barbarian Battle Deity Suit. The reason why the central continent stood above the other continents in terms of influence and strength was precisely because of this reason. It had nothing to do with whether the average strength of its fluxers or their combined strength was highest, just that it had War God who could suppress everyone else. From this, the terrifying strength of War God as well as the supreme battle suits could be clearly seen. When Li Yunmu heard everyone's explanations, only then did he completely realize how valuable were these Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets which he had obtained from Zhang Tianhang. Then what about the Azure Dragon deity suit? In the 6 continents, who has gathered most of its parts? Li Yunmu couldn't help but ask. Azure Dragon deity suit, 4 of its components' locations are known. The helmet and breastplate are in the hands of Northern Continent's frontline god. He is the person who has gathered the most of this deity suit. His 2 parts are mainly for defense, so his defense is tyrannical. Northern Continent's frontline god. Li Yunmu instantly felt some pressure. This person was the Northern Continent's most powerful person, basically someone on the same level as War God. He had now obtained the Azure Dragon Gauntlets, and heavens only knew whether it was a good thing or not. However, the meat had already entered his mouth and so, given Li Yunmu's nature, he naturally wouldn't spit it out. It could be said that he could only find a way to benefit himself instead from this danger. Lin Jian continued, another part of Azure Dragon deity suit, the leg guards are in the hands of a halted fluxer of our dimension, his name is Devil. He is the 2nd most powerful person in the 5th dimension. He is extremely sinister and nefarious by nature, not someone who can be trifled with. That's right, Devil is so strong because he managed to get his hands on Azure Dragon leg guards. His movement speed can be considered as the greatest within the 5th dimension, there is no one who can compare to him. This monster has remained within the 5th dimension for 5 years now. Back when he started, he didn't hesitate in discarding his cultivation and starting from 0, just to use those Azure Dragon leg guards. He has now already congealed the King Crystal armor and can properly utilize the deadly power of that part of the deity suit. Frontline God had once sent many people from his group to hunt him down, but until today, no one has been able to catch this person. If Master wants to fight with this devil, then you must find a way to restrict his speed first or perhaps become even faster than him, Li Qinghong suggested. Oh, I have no such intentions for the moment. The secret that I've obtained these Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets must stay among the 4 of us. Li Yunmu indeed didn't have any intention of seizing Devil's Azure Dragon leg guards for the time being. There were 3 reasons for this. First, since Frontline God had been trying for so many years without any success, it meant that this devil person wasn't someone who could be easily trifled with. Second, his main priority at the moment was to increase his cultivation so that his strength could increase as well. Otherwise, even if he possessed heaven-defying battle prowess and could fight against Rainbow Crystal Fluxers who had a much higher cultivation than him, his cultivation would remain the same. In the eyes of Flux Masters, he would remain as only a slightly powerful ant. And finally, the 3rd reason was that Li Yunmu still required this devil person to handle the pressure of Frontline God. If Li Yunmu got his hands on 2 components of the Azure Dragon deity suit, then a superpower like Frontline God would focus his entire firepower on him alone. Little brother, you don't need to worry. My whole family is now another ant walking on the same rope as you. What we discussed today, this old man guarantees that whether Ho family exists or not, this matter will certainly not reach the ears of the 5th person. At the moment I'm just afraid of that bestial sage, old Ho said with a trace of worry. Chapter 178, Unremarkable Whetstone. That's right, if bestial sage made the information about Azure Dragon Gauntlets public, then we'll have to hold the skies from falling on our heads. Li Yunmu had already understood something. Presently the flux energy was considered paramount, and the strong preyed on the weak. Every person who wants to rise quickly must have the determination to cut through all obstacles. Every halted fluxer faced this, including Devil. He, Li Yunmu, was also the same. The amount of resources was finite, and the amount of the best resources was even smaller. If he didn't have the resolve to seize the meat from the lion's den, then how could he ever be regarded as a formidable fluxer? In that case, even if he had powerful battle prowess, he would still be considered as a weak-minded person. He collected Azure Dragon Tyrannical Gauntlets back into his heavenly world. Right now wasn't a suitable time to merge them with his King Crystal armor, because there were still some other treasures he wanted to get appraised. Next, Li Yunmu took out the second item, which was a fist-sized crystal that was shaped like a crane. Summoning Crane Crystal, there's only one of this item in this world. This treasure didn't require appraisal from Old Ho and was identified by Li Qinghong and Lin Jian. Summoning Crane Crystal. What is it used for? Li Yunmu asked. It is very useful. This summoning crane crystal can step across dimensional planes and spread information without being restricted by the dimensional fields. It isn't a sage level item but a transcending sage level item. Every major clan and organization places a great importance on it, because transmitting information is always of great importance. This item was created from the spirit of an extremely rare and unique life form of the sixth dimension which can move across worlds. After the refining was complete, it became one of its type treasure. I hadn't expected that the bestial sage would really bestow such a precious treasure on Zhang Tianhang, Old Ho lamented. What is its price? It's a treasure which has a price but no market, since there is no one who wants to sell it. Hearing this information, Li Yunmu's heart skipped a beat. With this summoning crane crystal, he would never be deaf and blind again. Regardless of where he was, he could rely on this summoning crane crystal to receive information about outside world. What about this blood pearl? It was also obtained from Zhang Tianhang's body. Li Yunmu took out the third item. This time, Old Ho took it and observed it for a long while. He then took a deep breath and said, Sacred Purifying Pearl. It is also a sage level item, and an extremely precious treasure. The bestial sage must have poured half of his wealth on this Zhang Tianhang. However, this person still remained a trash and so everything fell into your hands. Another sage level item. This time, even Li Qinghong and Lin Jian were completely astonished by Li Yunmu's harvest in the battle. Who could have expected that bestial sage would bestow so many treasures to Zhang Tianhang, a trifling golden crystal fluxer? If this information had been known by other fluxers, then probably most of them would have taken the risk to kill him and this great harvest wouldn't have fallen into Li Yunmu's hands. Sacred Purifying Pearl? But given its appearance it seems more like a demonic pearl. You're mistaken, it is the blood essence of a formidable life form which requires sacrificial refining to be used. After absorbing this formidable life form's blood essence, one's body will be strengthened. This item also has another name, it is known as Sacred Sage Pearl by everyone. As long as the person who refines it cultivates a formidable body refining technique, then the chances of his flesh breaking through to sage layer will be greatly increased. It is a precious treasure even among sage level items. So this was the case. Li Yunmu subconsciously glanced towards Li Qinghong. Apparently this sacred purifying pearl had similar effects as the undying sage blood which she possessed. The difference between the two was that one would certainly get you to enter the sage layer, while also possessing the mystical ability to bring you back to life, whereas the other one would only increase the chances of entering sage layer. Still, if this pearl was used by some fluxer who cultivated a body refining technique, their flesh would most probably break through to the sage layer, and so this was an extremely precious sage level treasure. Li Yunmu's devil dragon bone refining secrets, if cultivated to the pinnacle, they would similarly allow his flesh to break through to the sage layer. But if this pearl was used as well, then his cultivation speed would increase even more. It needn't be said that not one person could ignore this sacred purifying pearl, and Li Yunmu instantly collected it back into his heavenly world without saying anything. I still have another unknown item. Li Yunmu finally took out a piece of pitch black whetstone. Blade intense stone, it is a naturally formed blade intense stone. At this moment, Lin Jian became so excited that he couldn't help but cry out. Yes, naturally formed blade intense stone is an extremely precious natural treasure for those who cultivate blade skills. It can assist the blade users in condensing their own blade intent. Old Ho sighed again. This was also a sage treasure, all of the last few treasures taken out by Li Yunmu were Sage level 1s. Although this blade intent stone could be considered as useless for people who used other weapons, but for those who used blades, this was the most precious treasure. No wonder Lin Jian became so excited after looking at it. Li Yunmu was also a blade user. However, he didn't need this blade intent stone, because the blood fiend energy was absolutely hegemonic and he didn't need a second type of blade killing intent. He didn't hesitate and immediately threw this naturally formed blade intent stone to Lin Jian. For me. The latter's entire body trembled. He had never anticipated that Li Yunmu would hand over the most precious treasure for a blade users to him. Yes, only when the blade overlord has this whetstone, only then would he be considered as a true blade overlord. Keep working hard. Li Yunmu faintly laughed. Even he didn't know from which fluxer had he obtained this unremarkable whetstone from. If the system hadn't pointed out that it was extraordinary, then he certainly would have treated it as an ordinary item. Good, very good. With this whetstone, my chances of becoming a flux sage will increase greatly. Mere words cannot express my gratitude. Lin Jian suddenly calmed down and bowed towards Li Yunmu with extreme seriousness. His hatred required formidable strength to get revenge. When Li Yunmu handed over this naturally formed blade intent stone to him without any hesitation, the hopes of vengeance were again reignited. First time, the desire to follow this youth took form in Lin Jian's heart. Li Qinghong, who was standing on the side, also was stunned when she saw this. Undying sage blood, he didn't want and returned it to her, and he also didn't take the naturally formed blade intent stone but gave it to Lin Jian. After Li Qinghong entered the Chaotian sect and was treated as a furnace, the feeling of complete paranoia had took hold of her mind. If Li Yunmu hadn't been a blade user, she might have accepted it as reason. But suddenly she discovered that she couldn't see through this person Li Yunmu. The trace of sincerity accidentally shown by him made her feel extremely strange and weird. Good then, all the battle spoils have been appraised. Old Ho, this time, I must again trouble you with something. My mysterious Li sect requires a large amount of stable flux crystals. These are 200 million dimensional coins, so I'll have to trouble you to carry out this transaction secretly. Li Yunmu wasn't polite. After having done all sorts of secret transactions, both sides had reached a certain mutual agreement. Li Yunmu no longer had the means to accomplish this task, so he could only rely on Old Ho's Good News Pavilion to accomplish it. Although Li Yunmu didn't trust Old Ho fully, but he was certain that this old man wouldn't miss the opportunity. Besides, the trifling Ho family really couldn't afford the price of betraying Li Yunmu. The matters were then soon dealt with, and the three people secretly entered the largest black market of the virtual dimension world. This time, before setting for Moro Mountain Tenebrous Hidden Domain, Li Yunmu learned from his lesson and knew that he needed a dimensional space eye from the black market. Otherwise, if he entered the wilderness, he would once again instantly lose his eyes, and he didn't want to suffer from a sudden attack like last time. Chapter 179, Wealthy and Domineering. The underground market of the virtual dimensional world was located underneath the most prosperous business district of the Rainbow Crystal Fluxus region. The transactions in this black market were handled according to invisible rules which were mutually agreed upon previously. After all, many items sold here had mysterious origins, since most of them had been looted from other people. That's why the majority of sellers didn't want to reveal their treasures openly and preferred to keep their identities secret, and so they came to the black market to sell their loot or buy what they required. Li Yunmu led Li Qinghong and Lin Jian to have lunch and then hurried to come here. The three of them didn't retain their previous swagger when they entered this place. A black gown with a face mask were the most commonly seen dress code in the black market. Midday wasn't the time when the business at the black market was at its peak, but the place was still filled with numerous fluxers who were mixing among themselves like dragons and fishes. Master, a major transaction like buying a dimensional space eye can only be done at the Thunder Underground Company. However, the prices will be extremely high, Lin Jian said, leading Lee Yun-mu into the underground company he had just mentioned. According to his experience, if you wanted to make a big purchase like Dimensional Space I, then the decision shouldn't be made hastily. If you were intending to spend a lot of time in the wilderness, then maybe you should consider purchasing a second-hand Space I that's been shot down. The price would be greatly reduced than if you were to buy an all-new Dimensional Space I from the Thunder Underground Company. However, Lee Yun-mu didn't have the time to wait for that. After the manager received them and learned of their purpose, he instantly led them into a room with precious items. Soon, Lee Yun-mu saw 3-dimensional Space Is. The price for all of them was 900 million. If it had been 10 days ago, Lee Yun-mu probably wouldn't have been able to buy even a single component of a dimensional Space I. However, he now only wrinkled his brows a little, but still immediately decided to purchase all 3-dimensional Space Is and paid for them right away. Spending 900 million in one go, how domineering! Lee Yun-mu instantly turned into a VIP of the largest black market company, the Thunder Underground Company. It was evident that there weren't many people who would be so domineering as to take out 900 million dimensional coins without much thought. Great wealth! The dimensional Space Is produced by the government of the central continent were much better compared to the ones produced by private companies. Their manufacturing price was 100 million dimensional coins for one, however, here, the price had almost tripled, and without any increase in quality. But Lee Yun-mu didn't bother with it and immediately threw the money at the manager. He didn't even consider wasting a month for some second-hand shady goods. When Lee Yun-mu was finished with his purchase, suddenly, a low-level fluxer was pushed out of the company by a shopkeeper who kept cursing him. What bullshit runic page, although the damaged runic pages do sell for a good price, how can you motherfucker think that just one page is a treasure and ask for such a high price for only a single damaged runic page? Get lost! This was nothing out of the ordinary, all the businesses opened in the black market operated this way. If you had money, you were their grandfather. If you didn't have money, then you were their grandson. All the other business and customers kept moving on their way without paying any attention to this matter. Preaching logic was just nonsensical in this area. However, when Lee Yun-mu looked at the black crystal fluxer holding the damaged runic page in his hand, he was immediately startled. He was really fortunate. Surprisingly, it belonged to the same series of runic pages which he had obtained from the Dwarf Witch clan. At this time, the system gave a timely reminder, "Host, the system has detected a damaged runic page of the Dwarf Witch clan which hasn't been gathered yet. If you could purchase it, the system could deduce the entrance even more accurately." Without waiting for the system to speak more, Lee Yun-mu walked forward and asked, "This damaged runic page, how much do you intend to sell it for?" 3 million. It must be 3 million and not a coin less. The black crystal fluxer was startled, but when he saw the two followers walking on Lee Yun-mu's both sides as well as the manager of the Thunder Underground Company accompanying him, he immediately became excited and quoted a high price. "Done, however, you must also tell me about its origin." "Okay, but since you also want to hear the relevant information, that will be 5 million, the black crystal fluxer hurriedly said. At this time, the staff of the Thunder Underground Company which had pushed the black crystal fluxer outside anxiously said to Lee Yun-mu, "Didn't you hear the initial price he quoted? He had intended to sell it to our Thunder Underground Company for a price of 1 million. But it was too late, because Lee Yun-mu moved his hand and touched the stellar COMM on the other man's hand, immediately transferring 5 million dimensional coins. Wealthy, domineering, an idiot with money. At this instant, not only the staff of the Thunder Underground Company, but even the black crystal fluxer himself were left completely astonished. The goods hadn't been delivered and this person already transferred the money to his account? There was surprisingly such an idiot in the world. Didn't he know that this was the black market? If you paid the money first, then which mother***er would proceed with the bargain? However, he didn't dare to run off, for the next instant Lee Yun-mu said one sentence that froze him in his tracks. "You can choose to renege, you can also try to leave, but then your life wouldn't be yours anymore. One average line of warning intimidated everyone in the surroundings, including the staff of the Thunder Underground Company. It was the first time that they had encountered someone using such domineering tone in the territory of a large-scale underground company. Generally, even Rainbow Crystal Fluxers wouldn't dare to talk loudly in front of this company. Who was this person? He had spent 900 million without any hesitation and even talked in such a domineering way to a customer of the Thunder Underground Company, who was startled to the extent that he didn't respond. In the end, the Black Crystal Fluxer handed over the damaged rune page to Li Yunmu. Let's go. After getting his hands on the rune page, he didn't remain to listen to the origin of this runic page and disappeared from the virtual dimension world. 5 million dimensional coins weren't important. What really mattered was to get his hands on the page efficiently, without providing any opportunity for others to dip their fingers into this matter. After returning to the real world, the trio appeared at the cave in Setting Sun Mountain Range. Of the three shadows, only Li Tian had remained behind to defend while the other two had already went to the surrounding area to continue with the hacking. Li Yunmu looked over their harvest, and decided that the efficiency wasn't great. In the past few hours they had only earned 2,000 experience and ability points. The number of dimensional monsters in the forests of Setting Sun Mountain Range wasn't great to begin with, and when the large group of Fluxers launched their hunting operation here, they also killed many of them in passing. Master's method was really good. The company clearly knew the genuine price of this damaged rune page, yet they tried to use reverse psychology to lower the price. But they had never expected that while doing that they would encounter an unexpected event where you would cut them off. The company must be regretting it at this moment. Lin Jian could see through the petty tricks used by the Thunder Underground Company without even trying. This rune page is a good treasure. I had heard that a 12 Light King grade dimensional beast was born in the Dwarf Witch clan not long ago, so this rune page should have come from there. The secret it contains is certainly extremely valuable, but since this is only one page it isn't of much use. Li Qinghong sighed. Who said there's only one page? Li Yunmu raised his hand which held 7 rune pages. Initially he only had 6 of them, but today they had become 7. Dwarf Witch clan's kind grade dimensional beast, was it Master who killed him? Don't tell me you're Heavenly World. This time, both of the halted Fluxers reacted. That's right, that was where I got hold of this fortune. Come, let's go. The region we need to go to now is the location described in the map on these rune pages. Li Yunmu walked out of the cave and summoned back his 3 shadows. Wings of the wind sprouted out from the king crystal armor. And he instantly flew into the sky, rushing toward the Moro Mountain Tenebrous hidden domain. He not only killed a king-grade dimensional beast, but also gathered 7 damaged rune pages by himself. Lin Jian and Li Qinghong looked at each other and saw the awe in the other's eyes. They then immediately equipped their heavenly batwing armor and flew over to catch up to Li Yunmu. Chapter 180, Swift Progress. Li Yunmu and the 2 halted Fluxers were rushing toward Moro Mountain Tenebrous hidden domain, hoping to reach it before the night fell. In time, they descended on a mountain top. Li Yunmu actually wasn't very clear about the definition of the hidden domains in the wilderness of the dimensions. However, Li Qinghong and Lin Jian, these 2 halted Fluxers, were extremely familiar with them. Hidden domains were regions which possessed extraordinary similarity to the true 5th dimension. Thus, the Moro Mountain Tenebrous hidden domain was filled with many dimensional beasts who had passed over from the true 5th dimension. Because of this extremely high concentration of dimensional beasts, this was an extremely dangerous region. It wasn't no wonder then that at that time Lunuja had earnestly tried to stop Li Yunmu from coming here. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh, the 3 of them found a mountain peak and dropped from the sky. Li Yunmu took a deep breath and instantly sensed that the atmosphere here was quite oppressive. The sky was grey, having lost its usual blue color. The ground was covered by a layer of black soil, which was filled with endless stifling sensation. Even the mountains, trees, flowers, and plants were all black. This dimensional field seemed to have only one color, and it was black. Suddenly, when the three of them descended, a sharp hissing sound came from one of the black trees. Die! The frightful imperial spear in Li Qinghong's hand moved once and instantly erupted with rainbow flux energy which rushed toward the origin of the sound with incomparable accuracy. Ding! The spearhead of the frightful imperial spear, which carried a terrifying amount of flux energy, hit a hard object, producing sparks. A 20-meter-something two-horned devil python showed up, seemingly having decided that they were its prey. Li Qinghong's spear had hit its huge head, but the hard armor there had surprisingly blocked an attack from a halted fluxer. Powerful! The trio had just entered this dimensional field, and a two-horned devil python had already attacked them. This dimensional field was extremely terrifying. It hasn't died yet, should I kill it? Li Qinghong's forehead wrinkled. The two-horned devil python was clearly a dimensional beast from the true fifth dimension and its strength was at golden crystal layer. However, relying on its innately formidable physical body, it could even challenge a halted fluxer. Lunuja's words were correct. If a fluxer wanted to come here, then their cultivation must at least be at rainbow crystal layer, and they still needed a squad. Otherwise, alone, the person simply wouldn't be able to enter the depths of this hidden domain and could only stroll around the outer layer. The only exception was someone like Li Yunmu who possessed 3 shadows and had a powerful defense which would allow him to overcome the threat of the majority of dimensional beasts here. The point where Li Yunmu's group had descended wasn't the outer region, though. They had directly dropped from the sky to the deepest part of the Moro Mountain tenebrous hidden domain. No need, let my shadow clan deal with it. Once Li Yunmu said these words, the shadow behind his body immediately rose from the ground and divided into 3. Immediately, Li Yun, Li Feng, and Li Tian charged towards the two-horned devil python and started using violent blade from 3 directions. First strike, second strike, third strike, ninth strike. The devil python, even if it had a formidable body, couldn't last for more than 3 minutes under the concentrated offense of the 3 shadows and was finally chopped down. Li Yunmu immediately earned 4 times the experience and ability points he'd get normally, because he had now just killed a monster which was 4 layers higher than him, and obtained 188 points. Ample experience points, it really deserved to be called a formidable life form of the true 5th dimension. Li Yunmu inwardly sighed. When Lin Jian and Li Qinghong saw the 3 shadows, a hint of envy and fear appeared on their faces. The impression left by these 3 life forms summoned by Li Yunmu using secondary flux energy was extremely profound. The reason why Li Qinghong had been captured by Li Yunmu was because she had lost her ability to escape after one of the 3 shadows unleashed the Wind God tornado kick on her. It had kicked her with great power against which she couldn't resist, thus causing her defeat. Otherwise, with her astonishing combat strength of the 6th most formidable halted fluxer and her powerful frightful imperial spear, Li Yunmu would have had no chance of winning when fighting alone. Since the night has fallen, let's rest for some time and then search for the entrance of the secret region later. After killing the devil python, Li Yunmu found a level hill and decided to set his camp there. The 3 shadows, however, didn't come back but rushed out to kill monsters in 3 directions of the mountain, with Li Yunmu serving as the center of the triangle. Li Qinghong nodded, taking the responsibility for cooking their meal. Lin Jian in the meantime took out the whetstone and sat down at Li Yunmu's side to protect him. Time passed by slowly, so Li Yunmu took out his sacred purifying pearl and immediately started to refine it. After approximately 3 hours had passed, the pearl was refined and merged with his heart. The heart is the region of the human body which handles the most blood. The sacred purifying pearl had absorbed the blood essence of a formidable life form and so could completely purify the blood passing through the human heart, thus strengthening the limits of the human body's constitution. The flesh is a natural prison in itself, and opening the flux points is just one of the methods to break the natural limits on the human body. The other way was by absorbing an even more formidable purified blood essence to extract the pure blood and refine the body using it. It's the only genuine shortcut which allows the flesh to break through to the sage layer. When Li Yunmu refined and merged the sacred purifying pearl with his heart, he instantly felt different. Not far away, Li Yun and the other shadows killed a split-tooth beast. The next moment, Li Yunmu sensed how from the enormous corpse a blood-red thread, thin as hair, suddenly condensed and shot directly toward his mind. This thread of blood essence then permeated the sacred purifying pearl in his heart and then was purified. After this, it scattered and entered the countless arteries which carried the blood through his body. Oh! Li Yunmu didn't know whether it had been an illusion or it had really happened. Yet he could, for certain, feel that his body's strength had instantly increased while there was also a sensation as if his blood was boiling. Sacred Purifying Pearl, also known as Sacred Sage Pearl, was truly worthy of being called a treasure among the sage-level treasures. Although it couldn't compare to Chao Tiansek's Sungod bird's undying sage blood essence, but it was even more pure, and so more suitable to Li Yunmu. What a powerful effect! Li Yun and the other two shadows continued with their tasks and killed several tens of dimensional monsters in the surroundings. One after another traces of blood essence were absorbed by Li Yunmu's body and the increase in his strength became even clearer. In just half an hour, according to the system's data concerning the strength of his flesh, it had surprisingly grown by several pounds. This amount couldn't be considered great, but it was the effect of only half an hour. If Li Yunmu continued with this for a whole day, then as long as the origin blood essence of the dimensional beasts he killed was sufficiently formidable, then because of their accumulation, his strength might grow by even 100 pounds. It was no wonder then that this sacred purifying pearl could greatly increase a fluxer's chances to become a flux sage. Zhang Tianheng had certainly been a trash. Even though he had been bestowed such a powerful treasure, his combat strength was still so weak. I can see that master only lacks a purely body refining technique. If he had a top-notch one compatible with him, then its cultivation would certainly greatly improve. Lin Jian, who was protecting Li Yunmu while he was cultivating, fearfully thought in his heart. The three shadow clones combined with the sacred purifying pearl and a top-notch body refining technique would improve his cultivation at the speed as if it was being pulled by three chariots.